U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions pulled the plug on the Cole and Ogden marijuana memos on Thursday, which sparked a firestorm of responses in Colorado. Governor Hickenlooper and Attorney General Cynthia Kaufman both issued statements reassuring the cannabis industry that they will continue protecting law-abiding Coloradans. And Senator Cory Gardner made national news with his criticisms of the Justice Department from the Senate floor. Patty, was Westward at DEF CON 1 yesterday with this announcement?
Oh, it was. The siren sounded immediately. And we were looking at every comment. Every single congressional rep weighed in immediately. The senators weighed in immediately, which is good because for Colorado, this is a states' right issue. We've got a business that marijuana has been legal here for 4 years now with relatively few problems and a lot of cash coming into the coffers. It was a state amendment to our ballot to legalize it, and now for the feds to say, I mean, these memos essentially said under the Obama era that federal prosecutors would not be prosecuting in states where businesses in legal marijuana states unless they were breaking laws in those states too, but it would be a low priority. This removes all that. No one really knows what's going to happen, whether or not they'll just be going after bad actors or they'll be popping people who just happen to have an ounce of pot on them, which is what concerns a lot of people. We'll see it shake out, but Cory Gardner really, he gave a rousing speech yesterday morning because during the confirmation hearings for Jeff Sessions, he had specifically asked if Sessions planned to allow states that were exercising states' rights and had legalized marijuana, whether he would leave them alone, and he said he would. And now, obviously, this does not. So Gardner, if you listen to that speech, it was a great impassioned speech where he threatened to hold up all new justice nominees too. So good for Gardner on that.
David, you are our esteemed lawyer at the table, and there's a couple of different confusing legal things here for, I think, the average folks. I'm going to put myself in that group. When you hear a U.S. Attorney General and a memo, and then you hear a U.S. Attorney in Colorado saying, well, we're really not going to do anything different, and then you have other state officials here, how should the average Coloradan perceive legally what we're hearing from this announcement?
Unfortunately, the state of our current law is if the feds want to persecute marijuana businesses or users, they can. The most recent precedent is the Raich versus Gonzalez case from the Supreme Court earlier this century, where 6-3 the court said that Angel Raich, who had an illness that would be fatal without consumption of medical marijuana, and was consuming medical marijuana, was non-commercially grown, no commercial transaction ever took place, wholly within the state of California, that somehow Congress's power to regulate commerce among the several states can be extended so far as to go to purely non-commercial activity that occurs only in one state. That's the basis of a lot of bad federal laws on many topics, and the Supreme Court eventually should change its mistaken interpretation on that, but for now, the feds get to win. The good thing is they don't have the resources, fortunately, to go and persecute every user or every person who's growing for personal consumption. But just sending a few threat letters to landlords about invoking the prospect of civil asset forfeiture would probably be enough to mostly shut down the lawful commercial industry in this state. Kudos to all Colorado elected officials who stood up. The vast majority of them voted against the marijuana amendment that was adopted by the people, but on a bipartisan basis, they're doing a great job of unifying behind respecting the will of the people expressed through the Constitution. But as Patty said, Cory Gardner is far above all the rest. Everybody complains about the weather, but not many people do anything about it. Cory Gardner is the only one who is now making Jeff Sessions pay a price for it. He has the ability as a lone senator to put a hold on Department of Justice nominees, and he said he's going to do that. So he brought down the nuclear option, the biggest hammer, and he's the only one of all our Colorado elected officials who's really taken affirmative action to force the Sessions to pay some consequences for his lies during his confirmation hearing.
Eric, I guess I wasn't terribly surprised by hearing the vociferous points made by both Kaufman and Gardner, among other congressional delegations. But is that enough upcoming upcoming elections where the public will separate what's happening in D.C. from our own delegation, or will they want our delegation to pay for what's happening in D.C.?
Don't know fully the answer to that. Gardner doesn't have to face the voters now until 2020. Obviously, Kaufman and other U.S. representatives have to face them this year that we're now entering. I do not have perhaps the same affinity for the explosion of marijuana that some other people in Colorado, that some other people around this table might have, and that's all well and good. I do have an affinity for the concept of states' rights, and that states have that degree of sovereignty, and that the voters of Colorado considered this and passed it, and it wasn't even that narrow of a passage. I have no idea what it means to be a Republican these days, and this is just one issue of many. I thought being a Republican used to mean you supported states' rights and local rights, and you put a priority on them. But that seems, particularly in this Trump administration or Jeff Sessions administration, to be not a principle, but totally something of convenience. If it's something, if it's a convenient argument to use, they use it. If it's an inconvenient argument to use, they ignore it. So I totally support whether it's Hickenlooper, Cory Gardner, Cynthia Kaufman, Mike Kaufman, all the rest of them in terms of their statements yesterday. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out. Bob Troyer, the U.S. attorney here at the moment in Colorado, said the right things about this really not being a major factor, and it would be sort of still business as it had been before. But let's not forget, Bob Troyer reports to Jeff Sessions. Jeff Sessions is his boss, and if there is a new policy coming out of the U.S. Department of Justice, I don't know for how long U.S. attorneys around the country, in Colorado and elsewhere, will just be able to say, oh, never mind.
Ed, this is a huge industry, and I think it opened a lot of people's eyes to see graphics yesterday on the news where you saw nearly 35,000 people work in the marijuana industry in Colorado, comparing that to other industries. I think only one that was bigger was servers, like waitresses and waiters, at 54,000. You compare that, every restaurant in Colorado, there's only 20,000 more people that work versus the marijuana industry. Business-wise, is this making big waves?
It's hard to tell, and one of the reasons it's not seeming to drive people nuts yet is because of what Governor Hickenlooper and AG Kaufman came out and said yesterday. It was kind of the nothing to see here, let's move along, business as usual. Hickenlooper had a couple salient points about this. One, for the DOJ to start raiding local pot shops, whether that be here or in other states where they're legal, would imply that the DOJ has a much greater treasure trove of resources than we've ever been led to see. And they're fighting the war on opioids, on heroin. The guess is they're going to continue fighting those, and this will be almost a minor peck in that. The other thing that Hickenlooper made a good point about, he said that now more than half of America lives in a state where some form of marijuana, whether medical or retail, is legalized. And maybe what this does is open up the question to Congress. Should we go beyond letting states decide this, and should we have a federal weigh-in on this? Should we, have something that definitively says, okay, maybe we legalize marijuana, or that we specifically say states can legalize marijuana? So nobody thinks the sky is falling right now, but I think they're worried to see what might come down from the sky.